Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of our podcast. On today's episode, we're going to focus on the areas of law which intersect with paranormal activity. We're going to talk about criminal law, human rights law, and property law. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than what we've been doing so far because we have the privilege to be accompanied today by Dr. Muñoz, who is a specialist on human rights law, and he's going to talk about how this area of the law intersects with paranormal activity. But at first, I'm going to talk about criminal law and offer you some insights on this topic, which I find super interesting. Basically, criminal law has been linked to paranormal activity since almost the beginning of these activities. In Europe, for example, people that were thought to be witches were persecuted since the 14th century, 15th century, since like really long time ago. But those practices are not really done nowadays. People are not persecuted anymore because they're thought to be witches. Even though when we think about this, we may think about what I just told you, like Renaissance Europe, these practices are still in place in certain countries around the world. For example, in many African countries, this is still the case. The Ugandan Witchcraft Act, for example, still reads that any person who practices witchcraft will be persecuted and shall be liable on conviction to imprisonment. A second way in which criminal law is connected to paranormal activity is the criminalization of people who attack someone under the argument that the victim was part of a supernatural activity. This happened, for example, very recently in India, in the region of Jharkhand, where a woman was attacked and beaten under the accusation that she was a witch. This happened in 2021. Can you imagine? It was really not that long ago. So yeah, there's still some issues with this because and it's especially women. So it's a lot of gendered attacks that take place against people who are accused of practicing witchcraft. And then there's even a third way in which criminal law is connected to paranormal activity. And those are the cases in which paranormal activity has been used as the defense in a criminal trial. Even though it might sound crazy, this has happened. A case was, for example, the Rex versus Fabiano Chiene, in which basically the English colonial courts had to determine whether the belief in witchcraft could be accepted as a defense to murder. And it was concluded that it could. So criminal law has also been linked to paranormal activity in this way. Basically, it has been used as a defense. And then we have a really interesting case. This is a bit of an extra that we've included because you'll see what I mean. Basically, it's the Greenbrier ghost case. Basically, in this case, what happened is that the testimony by a ghost was used as evidence in a criminal trial. I find really this part the most interesting of all podcasts because basically what happened in this case was that a woman named Elbazona Hister Shue died in Greenbrier County in West Virginia. And this happened in 1897, so almost at the beginning of the 1900s. And at first, she was judged dead by natural causes, but then her mother said that her ghost had appeared to her in a dream, telling her that it had been the husband, so basically the Elbazona Hister Shue's husband, that had murdered her. And then the woman, the mother, took this to court, and it was accepted as valid testimony, basically the testimony of a ghost, which is really crazy to me. But yeah, who knew this? Testimony by a ghost can be accepted as proof in a criminal trial. But this super interesting case, but who knows if we'll ever see anything like this again, concludes our section on criminal law. And today we have a doctor who is a specialist in human rights law. This is Dr. Muñoz. Basically, a bit of a background on him. He comes from Spain and he has been studying human rights law since a really long time ago. So Dr. Muñoz, who has also done a PhD on paranormal activity and witchcraft and the ways that it relates to human rights law, will talk to us a little bit more about the topic. So, hello, Dr. Muñoz. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you would say broadly human rights law intersects with the paranormal?
Indeed, the intersection of superstition and human rights violations paints a harrowing picture of injustice and discrimination. Across cultures, individuals with albinism face persecution driven by myths and superstitions, leading to atrocities like mutilation and murder. And in regions like East Africa, these deeply entrenched beliefs fuel a tragic cycle of violence against the most vulnerable members of society.
Wow, that really sounds so atrocious. I can't even imagine being persecuted only on the basis of being albino, for example. Do you have maybe other examples of how these two fields relate?
Moreover, the insidious influence of paranormal beliefs extends to the realm of human trafficking, where victims are cursed and terrorized with tales of voodooism and witchcraft. The case of US versus Jose Ticum serves as a stark reminder of how perpetrators exploit superstitions to perpetrate heinous crimes and subjugate their victims.
Oh, wow. Yeah. This is really crazy to hear. Is there maybe anything else that you may tell our listeners today? I don't know, maybe other ways in which human rights law connects to the paranormal. I don't know if there's any more, but maybe you have some other insights.
Sure, yes. And let us not overlook the stigmatization of religious practice like voodooism, which undermines the fundamental right to religious freedom. By marginalizing these beliefs in legal contexts, we perpetuate human rights violations and deny individuals the autonomy to practice their faith without fear or discrimination.
Wow, that was really enlightening. Thank you so much, Dr. Muñoz, for being here.
Okay, thanks to you.
And yeah, goodbye. Have a great week and a great weekend. And don't forget to listen to our podcast. So basically, this was Dr. Muñoz, who, as we've said, is a specialist in human rights law, has written a PhD on this topic precisely, and has especially delved into the persecutions of albino people in African countries. It's really atrocious. I can't imagine what it must be, because apparently from a conversation that we were having before about this, he told me that albino people, and especially albino babies, they're sometimes mutilated and their body parts are trafficked and carried around for money because they're thought of as, pieces of good luck. So yeah, really atrocious, obviously human rights violations. So it was really enlightening what Dr. Muñoz had to say about human rights law and the ways that it connects to paranormal activity. We're gonna conclude the podcast today with consumer law. Consumer law, we already touched upon it a little bit on the previous podcast, but it's basically the last intersection which we're gonna talk about today. Basically, we're going to come back to what we said about the Fraudulent Mediums Act of 1951 of the United Kingdom, which basically, it was a law in England and Wales, which prohibited a person from claiming to be a psychic, medium, or basically other spiritual person while attempting to deceive. So in 2008, this act was repealed by the Consumer Protection Regulation, which basically forces mediums to make a disclaimer stating that invoking spirits is an experiment with no guaranteed results. And basically, yeah, the whole goal of this Consumer Protection Act was to protect these vulnerable consumers from potential exploitation. It's super interesting to me, though, that if these people who are, for example, mediums or who are psychics, I've personally never seen one. I've never attended or had any of these services performed. But let's imagine that their activity is legitimate and that they actually do connect with the other world or with ghosts or something like this. Would it be fair to them really to have this statement or disclaimer that they have to say that it has no guaranteed results and basically which may undervalue a little bit their activity? Anyways, this is just some questions that arise from consumer law connected to paranormal activity. There's a lot more issues, a lot more controversies that may arise, but with all the other areas that intersect with the paranormal activity. Basically, as we've seen, these are only some areas, a superficial view of how the paranormal connects to different areas of law. But already, we hope that it was a bit informative. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast, and we hope to see you again soon.